Welcome to the Nurture Pod. My name is Iris Sullivan Dare, and I'm here with the beautiful Ginger Edwards. And this is the place between that kind of between what is and what is possible. So it's being in the present moment, but imagining into what is possible. That's what we're all about.
Nice. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
It's been like 3 weeks. Sorry to everybody. We took a really long break.
Yeah, there have been
Um,
travels. There's been
there's been
lots of travel.
travels.
I traveled and you traveled,
I
so
did. You travel, and then we didn't do it on the same week, so it really got pushed out. But I think the last one we did was like 3 weeks ago.
yeah.
Yeah, like 3 weeks ago. So anyway, here we are. We're back. Now it's like almost the end of May. Ooh, and that seems crazy to me that it's already like pushing towards, it's Memorial Day weekend basically.
Yes.
And here we are entering summer. Um, so let's check in. What are you nurturing, Iris, as we roll into summer here?
I am, I have a job now that has accrues sick time.
Mm.
And I took a sick day yesterday because I have a head cold. Feeling quite a bit better today. And yeah, so I am really nurturing this occurrence that I don't have to be dying to for being sick, just being kind of, you'd think going through the pandemic, this would have been cured, but apparently there's always more work to do
Mm.
on our inner occurrences. And so, yeah, so that's what I'm nurturing. But really creatively, what's really lighting me up right now is all of these earth pigments. I'm teaching a class this summer on bookbinding class, and we're gonna all the colors in the books are gonna be based on local pigments.
Mm.
And so in my travels, I also gathered pigments. So I'm gonna make some place specific books for all three of those places. But really, I designed this class because I wanted to have an excuse to play with pigment.
Hmm.
So I'm like totally fully, and being sick and like having to spend a bunch of time in bed the last couple of days means that I got to really go down all these rabbit holes and read these like scientific papers. So total like the pig in the mud. Love it.
Nice. I know when you said I don't have to be dying, for you, dying's like this double word.
Total.
I was like, but do you have to be dying? Like,
I always want to be
not dying, but you
dying.
want to be that dying the other way. Yeah. Um, cool. Yeah. I remember taking a walk with you recently and you were stopped immediately and like dug some red clay out of the side of the road. And we're like, this is good. Like wrapped it in a little piece of tissue. And I'm like,
Stuck in my pocket.
oh, you're into this. I've walked past that red clay, I don't even know how many times, never even noticed it.
I'm like,
I know it's cool hanging out with like geeky artists. They're like, oh man, look at that rock. I can pound this rock and mix it with this. I'm like, okay, you do you. No, it's very cool. Yeah, cool. I'm gonna steer us and I'm gonna steer the ship here for a minute. Is that cool?
Excellent.
Yeah,
That's perfect.
because I just listened to something that kind of lit my little fire. Um, and it was a guy who was being interviewed. Really good podcast I like called On Being with Krista Tippet. She does a really nice job on her podcast interviewing very interesting people, and she's very nurture forward. You know what I mean? She's definitely geared her show towards the positive and like what we can do. And this is a guy. His name is David Bornstein, and he's from the Solutions Journalism Network. And they just started having a conversation, and then immediately I was like, whoa, what did he say? And I've actually like rewound it and listened to it again because that was one of those, and
Yeah.
I listened to it on my trip and I was like in motion and I was like, wow, this is really good. And then I kind of re-listened to it today right before we talked, just so I can refresh my brain. But I thought I'd bring it to the podcast because I think right now, and especially, I don't know if you visited family. I went home to visit family in Michigan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it is very apparent to me that like the media is playing a very big role in how we interpret and exist in our world. Like it's
Yes.
how people think. It's how he calls it the connective tissue of the world. Like the media, what it means, it's like mediating to us like what's going on beyond our direct experience in our life, right? So it's being mediated through this like network of reporters and people and institutions, and so it kind of creates this, I don't know, like this, yeah, like this connective tissue of the world, right? And he said, right now our phones are updated every 2 minutes with like the news stream is coming
Oh,
that
oh,
fast. Like
right,
it's a
right.
consistent like upbeat updating of the news stream. That's how like fast it's pouring in. And I think overall, when I talk to my mom and my sisters and stuff, like the sense of overwhelm
Mm-hmm.
is just really clearly apparent. And what I could relate to that. I mean, I've got off social media and was like, oh, thank God. But that's where I got a lot of news. I mean, I was getting a lot of
Yeah,
information, but it was coming in a package my brain, like
was
my
too much.
nervous system couldn't handle. And if you think about um this idea that it's being updated constantly and it's in our pockets, and then we're mediating our worldview of what the world is like from this.
Yes.
And it's also in America kind of always been held up as like one of the pillars of our democracy, like the press, right? Like we need the press to mediate kind of our experience of our government too, and like what's going on in politics. Like they play a really key role. So
And
it's
holding
right.
and holding them accountable. And so then what happens when they're not holding them accountable?
Yeah, and they're holding the so, but he goes even deeper into it, and this is where I kind of got really fascinated because it was not just that we're all overwhelmed, which we are, but really like how journalists themselves view their role, and specifically how they view their role since like the 1970s onward, and how it shaped how we view the world, and also kind of led to the current administration we have. So it's like a really interesting like arc that he created. But the bottom line is, and stop me if you want to jump in anywhere in here. I'm just gonna like lay out
Okay.
his theory. He has this the theory of change in journalism. It's kind of like for the 20th century that the idea is the world will get better if we once we show people how awful things are. Like
Uh,
it's our job to point out the problems, and uh then people will know about it and will take action. That's like the theory of journal. It's like they teach this, and like that kind of this is what journalism go out to do. Like our job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, that kind of idea. Like it's our job to point out what's going on. But he makes a really good point. He's like, but if you take that theory and then you put it into like, okay, if you put that into like a family situation where like, so to make my kids like better, I would just like point out their flaws every morning at the breakfast table. Like I would,
right.
I'd be like, here's this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, and that would, improve the situation. And we
Yeah.
inherently, intuitively know that that's not how that works, right?
Well, that's like the whole like appreciative inquiry is
Mm-hmm.
based on the total opposite. It's like this idea of creating change, not necessarily change, but like of designing anything,
Mm-hmm.
working on a system in some way. And if you're only focused on the bad stuff, and especially the more emotion is involved, the less access you have to that part of your brain that can problem solve.
Right.
And so, like, if you actually need to problem solve, you need to be like, move past that. It's like, okay, this is what is. Where is it working? How do we build on that?
Yeah.
And so it's like you find out what is working, and then you follow that, and it's like, how can we lift that up? And it's like, okay, and then you look, it's like this like
Right.
you
And
have to.
so yes, and I think that's really important. Like what's working, how can we build on that, right? That would
Yes,
help our brains.
yes,
However, journalism as a school of thought is like that would be advocating for something, and they don't advocate. They don't see that as their role. As a matter of fact, they see that as like anti-journalists. Like we don't advocate for solutions. Our job is to point out the problem. The solution isn't our business.
this is a super interesting philosophically.
Right? This is what I'm talking about. He kind of dug into it at this level, and I was like, oh my God, that's right. Like And so they actually make an ethical point of not doing that. But he reckons like it would be like going to a doctor who just tells you that all the things that are wrong with you, but then won't tell you any solutions, like won't give you any advice on like how to make it
Yes.
better. Like nobody would go to that doctor, right? Because we need, after you tell us that we have this horrible thing wrong, we want you to be like, okay, what do I do about it? And journalism,
Right.
they won't do that because they
I
see that as being more like partial and advocating for a certain viewpoint. And they're like, oh no, that's not our job. We can't do
did,
that.
did you take journalism in even like high
I didn't.
school?
I didn't.
I
No.
because like the one thing I remember,
Mm.
mostly because I didn't really get to go to class very much because I knew how to use the dark room, so I just turned into a dark room slave kind of super quickly. But the one thing I remember from journalism class is them talking about this like yellow journalism, this like in like how this problem of like it's
I do
how
remember that. Yep.
right like how like and what they meant is like journalism that was attempting to sway the public,
Right.
persuasive journalism versus more, just the facts, ma'am.
Exactly.
And how problematic that is. But then the irony is like that's all I like. I can't, anytime I look at any media, and I sometimes do go and like listen to stuff from the conservative media just because I'm like, what are they telling people? And I don't
Right.
only want to have it through the lens of, late night comedians. Um,
Right. Yeah.
but like all across the board there, it's all yellow journalism. Like I don't even know what that phrase really means. Is it like it could be
Well,
problematic?
that is exactly right, because in their idea that, oh, we're not gonna be advocating for things, they're totally advocating for things because all they're ever talking about is the problem. And if all you talk about is problems, you're advocating for corruption, and his one of the pieces he really makes a point about is that they, like, journalists often look to like the high watermark of like investigate, journalism as its purest form is like, Woodward and Bernstein, 1970, like Watergate,
Yes.
breaking that
Yeah.
story, winning a Pulitzer Prize. Like, wow, like that is like, that's really good journalism, right? And so they've modeled themselves kind of after a lot, like since that point, so many journalists, not only because awards are given in that direction, right? And
Right.
prestige is given in that direction, but because they actually think that that is like their highest calling. And a lot of it is to point out and look for corruption problems in the government. And unwittingly, like how they've set the stage for only pointing that out over and over and never pointing out anything that the government does well, which it does. I mean, the federal government does a lot of things that really help us, but journalism for like the last, 50 years has only been really leaning into, this is broken, this person's corrupt, they're lying, this is wrong, and not like that's not useful. But when you never bring up anything else, you do kind of tend to leave people with this, well, why are we even paying taxes then? Like, we never hear
Right.
about what's going on, what's right. He said there's like actually an award ceremony, and it's for like, it's called the Sammys, and it's like for the Good Samaritan Awards for federal government workers who do extraordinarily good things in their jobs to help a lot of people, and they give them an award every year, like if they're really good. And he's like, no journalists go to this, like zero. And he's like in the solutions journalist, so he always goes. He's like, nobody covers it. Like, compared to the Met Gala, where there's like, 50 million journalists like taking photographs of people's dresses,
Yeah.
like we never get to hear about anything that the government does well. So unwittingly, I don't think they did this on purpose, but like because the
Right.
way journalism is set up, when you get somebody like Donald Trump who shows up and starts saying, yeah, let's destroy the federal government, there's this huge like buildup of understanding of the American people. Like, yeah, we've been told over and over and over again that the government doesn't work. It's corrupt. It's, blah, 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 blah. And so, yeah, why not? Like, there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, just rip down the Department of Education, destroy the EPA. Like, they're just causing problems. They're just corrupt. They don't do their jobs, like
Oh
the
my God.
FDA. And so you have this kind of buildup that led to where we are now. And not to blame journalism, but to like really look at like how that created the system, that we currently have, that we're, how people are, that mediation between us and the government, how it created
Yes.
like how people are really feeling about it. Like they don't really care that much that the Department of Energy is being gutted, because nobody really understands what the Department of Energy does. Or if they do understand it, it's only what they've done wrong. And so it's really easy for the, like, Elon Musk to come in as a corporate CEO, because you have this whole other like business news. This is a different wing of the like business and business magazines like Fortune and Forbes. They
Are only telling the
do
positive
they're
stuff.
super positive, right? Like they're the ones who lean in heavy on like, oh my gosh, this massive success story and like everything these tech guys have done right and like how they led their company through all these challenges and what, how they've built all this
Right.
success. So we unwittingly been trained to be like business leaders know what they're doing. The federal government's a total corrupt mess. And like that is kind of how the news media has mediated our world for us to this idea. And I don't think it was on purpose, you know what I mean? Like it was just kind of like how it's been functioning.
Well, and it's like you set up the parameters, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
sample space is the agreed upon norms and ideas of what's happening in the situation.
Right.
So the sample space for baseball is you use this weight of ball, it's made in this way, you use these kind of bats, this is how you set the field, and then that's where how you play baseball. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like you don't play baseball on the football field.
Right.
And so like they're setting up the parameters of the game that they're playing and not realizing that yeah, like not because if there's no in two things make my brain go boing from what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is when you look at children, which is really when you look at raw humans. When you look at
Yeah.
raw humans, attention is the currency.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's neglect, then the attention that they will get attention in any way because it is deeply wired that that is survival.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to look at me. Even if when you look at me, you are going to swat me, I'm still alive. So
Right.
even if there are negative consequences, the goal is to be seen and not forgotten so that I don't die. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like our little, inner little tiny person.
Mm-hmm.
And so what gets attention is what is being fed. And so if we are only looking at the negative, we are only feeding the negative and that whole like the
Right.
which wolf are you going to feed, which seed are you going to nurture, like all that. So like that's like seems like oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then the other thing that this brought up is this idea that in this attempt to have this idea of just the facts, ma'am, this
Mm-hmm.
non-emotional intelligence way of presenting information that evolves out of this philosophy. There's also this crazy thing where they're always working in the binary. So if you have the story, you always want to give both sides of the story so that you're
Mm-hmm.
giving it without any bias. It's unbiased to give both sides of the story, even when one's which gives equal weight, equal attention,
Mm-hmm.
even when one side is like absolutely incorrect or
Mm-hmm.
harmful or
Well, what was interesting is that he said he actually went. He works with journalists, and he said, I went in and I said, okay, here's like as obvious as we can make it. Like, there's two stories. On one side of the river, a school has a graduation rate that went from 85% to 50%. And then on the other side of the river, there was another school who had a rate that went from 50% to 85%. What's the story? And like every journalist was like, it's the one that fell. It's the school that whose graduation went down.
oh,
And if because that is their job, like that's what they see. Like there's the problem. We need to talk about the problem. The school that's doing better, there's no problem.
breaking
Like why
news.
why would we talk about graduation rates going up? Why would we talk about the government being efficient? Why would there's no story there. Like that's how they view it. So it's like it's beyond even what you're saying. It's like they don't even talk about the good stories. Like they just don't see that as their job at all. And the interesting part of that is that you would like the solutions of how to improve graduation rates are in the success, like they're built into the
Yes,
story of
yes,
the kids doing better, right? Like that's
yes.
where the actual information that can help us is. And yet that's not talked about. What's talked about is the problem and what's being messed up and who's to blame and blah 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 blah. So that's and then we get that and we don't get the other story at all. And so what our brains do after we get that every 5 minutes updated on our phone from the entire global network of news that's coming in, problem, because all these journalists think they're doing their job. And we're not even talking about all the guys just making stuff up. I'm talking about like the journalists who are trying to actually report news,
Be journalists. Yeah.
be real journalists. I'm not talking about like all the right wing and people who are just making shit up. Our brains do very clearly, like we just can't, we avoid it because it's too much.
Yes.
We deny that it's happening at some level because we can't deal with it, or the grief is too big, or we blame the media themselves, like, and we don't trust them. Like, oh, I don't know if that's true, so they say that, but and then with the era of AI coming in, there is a lot of like actual incorrect things that are being published.
Yes.
Like that are just like I saw this thing, the Chicago Sun Tribune used AI to write like a whole guide to the summer. And like, as other reporters went through it, they're like, these things aren't even real. Like these authors and these books don't exist. Like all these events are wrong. Like they didn't even they just like printed it. Like they let
They printed it.
Yeah,
They
they
printed
printed
it.
it. And it's
Holy
like, so
shit.
then that just leads into this whole, like, we don't even know if anybody actually wrote that story, right? Like a computer wrote that story and it's full of inaccuracies. And so you then throw that on top and it gets to be like, you can see why all the us in the actual receiving the media are like, I don't, maybe not, that might be true. And
But also
there's no solutions in any of it, right? There's like, but it's still, so you just are deepening the problem of distrusting the media that you're getting, and also you're not getting any help. Like no one's giving you any
and how can you collaborate as a community or as a society when you don't have the whole story, right?
right. Yeah.
So like if you're only looking for the problems,
Right.
then
You're advocating for the problem. I mean,
you're advocating
at
for the
some
problems.
you are, because you've only chosen that to talk about. And so in a way, you've already chosen your avocation.
And it's
Even
so interesting too, because those are the people who have been honing their skills to use words to create clarity,
yes.
right? And
Yep.
so, which is totally a beautiful skill. And
Mm-hmm.
so, holy McMoly.
And he talks about, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And we've
Yeah.
all heard that, like that's how media works. They put the thing that's because our brains are hardwired to scan for danger and threat. So they
Mhm.
know that if it's something terrible, that we'll read it because we're like, oh, we need to know more about that because it might be a threat to us somehow, or someone triple murdered, like, oh my God, we have to look at that. And so, because the other part of this that, because I don't want to just have a podcast about what's wrong either. I want to like be really careful that I give enough time for us to talk about solutions, because I don't want
Yeah.
to fall into this trap. But what I thought was interesting is that it's such an easy thing to do, even as a like individual with your friends, like the bleeds it leads, and he said that's actually
Yes.
coming from the telegraph era. Like that's going back like 100 years, and it was
Wow.
to sell a lot of like little penny press papers because these huge
Oh,
printing presses were really expensive and they needed to sell a lot of papers to like make this worth their money. So they would put like the most salacious, like, whatever thing they could put on the cover to sell it. And he's like,
exactly
and
like
you
the
have that
social media.
philosophy from like 150 years ago still operating. But when it operates at the speed it's operating now, like we have a million stories. I mean, if that's still the operating principle of the penny press from like 1805, like that's ridiculous.
Right.
Like our human nervous systems cannot handle, like absolutely will shut down with
No,
that much
having one
bleeds at least.
salacious story a week would be a
Right.
lot.
Right. And we get
Well, I
like,
love them every 2 minutes.
you can get as many as you want, basically. You just keep going and going and going. And
Yeah,
so
more than every 2 minutes.
so we know that so part of the conversation they had, which I thought was really fascinating, was how do you, if it bleeds, it leads, and everybody kind of knows that works. If it's scary, if it's threatening, if it's, um, even if it's made up, right? They just like they know that grabs our attention. And I think Donald Trump is a really master of this. Like he
Yes.
knows that if he just floods the media stream with all kinds of outrageous stuff, even if, whether it's true or not, the media feels compelled to report on it. So
Yes.
they're going to be like, oh my God, he published a picture of himself as the Pope, and that's a problem because some Catholics are, but it just
Yes.
fills our, data streams with information, and what it does is just shuts us down, right? We just like, we can't handle all this crap, and so we just don't look, which allows them to do whatever, because we're not looking anymore, or we don't trust it, or we don't think it's, we're not spending our
It,
time there.
and it also like completely disconnects us from each other.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's totally like instead of I did small claims mediation a zillion years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
like that whole thing is like the whole process of mediation is finding your common ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there is always common ground,
Yep.
and there's always common ground. And like, but if you only focus on he said, she said,
Mm-hmm.
or he did, she did, or whatever, like there's no reconciliation, so there's only
Right.
punitive action.
Yeah.
But if you can get people to step out of that and actually hear each other and then find the common ground, then it's very easy to build a solution that's not punitive, but restorative.
Yes, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I think one of the ways to get there, which I thought was really interesting from like a mindset coach kind of perspective, was he said the only thing in the human brain that will like be as compelling to us as bleeding, like, danger or threat, is curiosity. Like, because if you look at puzzles and detective novels and mysteries and even
Or
TV
pigment.
shows, or even TV shows where they have to fix something in a house and people will spend an hour waiting
Yes,
to see how this guy fixed this thing. Like, there's a huge media out there about, because our brains loved, we want to understand how they do it. We want to see how they bake the
yes,
cake. We want to see how they do it. So he's like, because the good news, like, media has been focused on like hero stories, or like they call it like eat your broccoli stories, like, oh, look how great and saintly or wonderful this person is. And he's like, unfortunately, goodness does not compete with threat. Like, goodness in our brains is like, oh, that's great, but it actually almost sends us into a little bit of shame spiral, like we're not that good. So, these like
yes.
hero puff pieces of people who are just amazing, we kind of like, okay, it doesn't really interest us that much. And as a matter of fact, we kind of like get uncomfortable because we're not maybe matching up in our own internal
Which is
dialogue.
that, oh my God, because that right there is
Mm-hmm.
like totally why people give a shit about what other people eat.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Like
Yeah.
why it's uncomfortable for people if I mention that I eat the way I eat, and it's like I eat the way I eat because that's what my body likes. I'm
Yep.
not eating the way I eat because you know, this
Yeah.
is a moral judgment, but like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he said, like, the New York Times, he's like, they make all their money off their puzzles, like their crossword. I mean, people subscribe to the Times like more
We
for like,
100%
yeah,
subscribe just for
yeah,
the puzzles.
right, exactly. That's, and he's like, so that if you want to look at like a solution of how to compel people to get into it, like, we have to. What's interesting about the good stories is, how did they do it? Like, if they got those graduation scores up, like, you could tell that story in a way that was like a puzzle. Like, there was all these problems, and then, like, build it, like, be good storytellers, basically. So we engage that part of our brain that's not like, oh my God, this school is just the best, and here's the award-winning teacher. We're like, whatever. But like, no, like, well, how did they figure this out? Like, what? Because it's like, all Harry Potter books are, and they sold billions of books. Like, basically, he's working out a problem. Like, how did he figure out what this thing does? And then there's another problem that he figured out the solution to. And we're kind of along for the ride. Like, he's like a little, magic detective, right? And it's very
Yeah.
compelling to us. That's good storytelling. And so he's bringing out, like, we need to create like a whole realm of journalism, which I think is very nurture culture based, about telling compelling stories about people who actually like figure this problem out and do it well and succeed, but in a way that's not like, eat your broccoli, be like this person, but like, whoa, how interesting that this,
Yeah.
and empowering other people. Like, you could figure this out too by following along, kind of
And
idea.
we can figure it out together,
And we
right?
can figure out together. Yeah. Like, almost like how would you figure this out? Here's a horrible problem. Like, what would you do? And then kind of lead them in, and then be like, well, this is what this one person did. And you'd be like, oh, right.
So
That's how
I've
you.
been observing with the wild things that I hang out with all the time,
Mm-hmm.
that if somebody is if they're being real like dysregulated or kind of wild, kind of frisky
Mhm.
and squirrely.
Mhm.
Or if somebody is doing something they know it's not the right, the behavior that's acceptable or whatever. But if I ask them to help me, if I
Mm.
like one for me is like the banging on the table thing, making percussion out of everything, or squeaking their chair intentionally, like making noise intentionally. And I'm pretty sound sensitive, and like it can like totally, it depending, but it can like totally make it almost impossible for me to continue. It
Mhm.
can. It doesn't always, but it can. And so like talking when I was just saying, please stop that. That has no impact whatsoever.
Mhm.
Pretty much 100%. Total failure. You have to tell them again, and they still do it. And then
Mhm.
it's like your choice is like to escalate it and make them leave the room or whatever, which is
Mhm.
like not my interest. But
Mhm.
once I started saying, hey, you know, this isn't about you being wrong or whatever, but I really need your help because when you make that sound, it kind of messes with my head. And I can't tell you the things that I'm here to tell you. And like it would really help me if you could, can I help you do something else?
Mhm.
Because it would really help me. Can we help each other? And so
Mhm.
like when I frame it like that, like it's totally, I mean, it's because I'm not manipulating, it's absolutely true.
Right.
It's like I'm like trying, I'm like,
Yeah.
what's I saying? And the other kids are like, stop
Yeah.
making that
Mhm.
noise. Like, but when it's like, when you say, here's a way that you can be a helper,
Mhm.
we like that. Like, I
Mhm.
think like versus look at Susie,
Right.
she's
That's
so good
exactly
and
right. Yep. There it
quiet
is.
and
Yep.
nice.
Mhm.
Instead of saying that you're bad, stop being
Mhm.
bad,
Mhm.
Jimmy. You know,
Yeah.
it's anyway, that was like a big, but
No, that's true. Like you point out, like, this is the problem. Like you said, like there's a problem. Like, let's get curious about how we can come up with a different solution. Right. Like, and that is much better than saying, like, yeah, you're doing something bad, but look at this good little girl over here who's being so quiet, making it like that totally doesn't work in our brains. You can see how our brain chemistry is like,
yeah,
I hate
yeah.
that girl now. And, I want to punch
And I
her
hate
at
you.
recess. Like, I don't, it motivates me to do nothing. It makes me want to be badder, like it's just, at least maybe that's my brain. But you can see, like, if you talk about it from a teacher perspective, but then change it to you're an environmental group and you're trying to get people to stop, whatever, using plastic bags or plastic straws, that it would be the same. Like, well, how do you
Look
tell
at
that
you.
story?
Look at Susie Broccoli. She never uses a plastic straw.
Yeah, or guilt, which is a lot of what is going on. I mean, there's so much guilt and shame. Here's these horrible pictures of, like, of animals that are, dead and, desecrated, like, oh my God, it's so bad. Like, I can't believe you would ever do something so horrible like that, and it motivates a certain amount of people who are susceptible to that to a certain point. But for a
Yes.
lot of brains, it's like, man, that's just not motivating at all. It's not interesting. It's just depressing. And when there's so
Yes.
much of it, because it just keeps coming, like, it's not one story about a turtle. It's like, pick your, there's a million of them. And then we're not even talking about humans yet, so you add layers and layers. Literally, our human nervous system dysregulates and we just shut it down. Or you go into, like, you're lying, like, I don't even believe you, like, how prove that
Yes.
that's even true, which you've got. And you can see that in the culture, right? There's a whole, but it's just a bunch of bullshit. Like, why do I even, I don't know. I mean, I don't believe that's even true. I can just use straw. Like, who made that up? And so you have this interesting opening, I think, moving forward. If we're going to build a nurture culture, I think the media is really powerful and important to look at. And this underlying narrative that's they're operating on has to change. It's like a
Yes.
paradigm change.
Yes.
Um, and
Yes.
how to you and what I was like, even to add to that, even as we're individually communicating to each other. Now, we're not all writing for, like, a journalistic paper, but we do talk to our friends and notice, like, how when it bleeds, it leads. Like, that's how we talk. Like, we bring up,
Yes.
like, the
Yes.
most
Yes.
intense thing we just heard and we repeat it and we're like, oh my God. And, blah, blah, blah. And, like, what if we just tried to tell that story in a different way. Like, look for the solution. What's the curiosity point instead of the threat point? Instead of how
Yes, yes.
horrible it is, what can we get curious about? Who is helping, who has figured out a solution, who's in there making a difference, like, and how is that interesting? Not because they're angels, but because, whoa, like, this is something they figured out, how interesting that is. And
And
how could that work for us? How could we replicate some version of that in our communities that would work? And I
and
think
I
those are the conversations we could start having with our friends and our communities and families instead. And it doesn't polarize people. That's the interesting thing. It does, because you're not telling anybody they're wrong. We're like, this is just a problem that as a culture we're going to have to figure out, instead of just heaping more onto the pile.
and defining the problem has a lot of power, right?
Yeah,
Like, and so like it's that both and thing. We actually do need to define the problem, because if you have a different definition of what the problem is than I do, then your solution set is completely going to be very different. And so
yeah,
if we're always letting somebody else define the problem, it's the orphan machine all over again.
it is. And the journal, and again, just to reiterate, like, journalism has a really strong bias towards pointing the finger at the government in particular, because they're supposed to represent us, and like they see that their job is to watchdog them, which it is. But when they're only doing that, and then they leave the business news to like the business people who are just celebrating and writing these like hero pieces. And it was
Yes.
interesting, he even said like they actually do better, like, look at how they write a story. This is how we could take this. We could be writing stories about the public space. The public sphere
Yes.
could learn a lot
Yes.
about how corporate journalism works, because they celebrate, they get curious about the challenges, they celebrate their wins. You know what I mean? Like, there's a whole like way they talk about things that is supposed to uplift and get people to be like, wow, that's so cool. Like, I want to buy that thing, right? I want to support
So
that company or that CEO. And we're not doing that for the public space at all. To
So I think this also brings into this thing of like holistic sharing of information in a more holistic way.
Yeah.
So like if it's only like part of that paradigm of like the irony of this, just investigative journalism and give all the facts, is that on one hand it's like this ideal that it would have very little emotion. I'm going to just give you the information in a very professional way without a
Yeah.
lot of emotional thing. But
Yeah, I don't care either way, right? These are just the facts. I'm not advocating for anything. This is just what I'm reporting on, period.
the reality is that it is not possible to separate ourselves from our emotions because
Nope.
we are
You
beings
just,
on this planet.
you're the doctor I just went to, and you just gave me a horrible diagnosis, and then you don't tell me anything. Like, there's no follow up.
Yeah.
There's no human nervous system in the world that can sustain that relationship over and over. And why would anybody go to you for information if you're not going to give us anything else?
So
So,
I
yeah.
think that like the coming from the heart space, including the heart space, and um not in a sappy.
Well, no, that's it, because people don't
Yeah.
care about that. I mean, the bottom line is we don't, goodness actually doesn't sell, doesn't win, doesn't motivate it. We don't even read it. I know. I mean, I'm interested in good stuff, and I'm drawn to the darker. I mean, I'll click on the
Yeah.
thing that is like the problem for sure.
I was thinking
Um,
about
so it's an interesting frontier of challenge right now. Like, how do
yes.
we tell these stories differently? And then, call it like nurture journalism or whatever you want. But like, there's this like, it's a paradigm shifting dynamic that could change a lot about how people think about what's going on in their worlds, and be much more empowering. So I just thought it was a super interesting like thought, just bring into the podcast and let people kind of contemplate like how, because like notice it in your own life. It's really evident like how we think
Yes.
based on the media we consume, like, because not only is this what we're reading, but we are then repeating and thinking about these things in this way, and we have all kinds of beliefs and biases built on these decades of media stories that we've consumed. And it kind of shapes our worldview. And
Oh
if
my
we want
God.
to change our worldview, then the media is a big part of it.
So this was voting this week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and our family, because Oregon has the mail-in ballots, our family, we usually all sit down at the table and like the boys, um, and this was so local based. Sam didn't call in because he has a different ballot, but
Yeah.
like in other elections where there's like, like we'll have like a Zoom call to vote and my friend Kestrel often votes with us. Sometimes she comes over and like we did very over the phone and like over the course of the day or whatever like so you got the great voter pamphlet from the state of Oregon and we're like reading about it. It's like why is there no information about this person? Like who are they? Like what do they even do? And so we're like everybody's researching and then like there's not it's I was talking to my sister who lives in a different state, and she's like, "Is that even legal?" And it's like, "Well, we're not
I know.
coercing each other,
Shout out to Oregon for the mail-in ballot because it lets you do this. Like it lets
right?" And
you
it's
do all
actually
that.
really
Yeah.
great. Like, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I make so much better informed decisions, but
Yeah.
I am getting information. Like we're being investigative reporters whenever we vote, right? We
Right.
we're getting
Yeah.
like, okay, who does who's backing that candidate, who's, da da. And the thing that was super interesting is there was one race where we didn't know either one of them. And so somebody reads something about it's like we're oh yeah, we should vote for that person. And then and then it's like farther on along, it's like, oh wait, what? And so then and it's like, okay, well, we can't vote for that person. And then like it went over the other person was like, oh, we should vote for that person. And then it's like duh, anyway, like it went
Yeah.
back and forth, like, yeah, I'm just gonna vote for person A. And then it's like, oh no, person B, no, person A, no. And then it's like after we kind of had like we had a more complete picture, it was like, oh, this is the clear answer.
Mm.
It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, like we went from, well, I was like gonna figure out who to vote for, but one of the other parties was just like, I'm just not gonna vote on that one because I don't know enough about it. And it's like, well, that's why we're here. Let's figure it out. And like, and so we did. But like, I just feel like that's the role of the media, right?
Mm.
It's to provide us with the information. And it's like thinking about how do you make a good decision and what do you need in order to make a good decision?
Mm-hmm.
And decision making is not difficult if you have the information you need.
Mm-hmm.
If you have more information than you need, it becomes really hard and you can just like analyze and make yourself crazy.
Yeah.
And if you don't trust the information you have, then, I mean, yeah, like it just feels like that experience of having to make a decision and it feels really, really hard. But once you have clarity, it's so instantaneous. Like it's like, oh, this is the
Mm-hmm.
clear step forward.
Yeah. But what's interesting about that is that for so many people, voting is just emotional. It doesn't have anything to do with information, like they're like, oh, I like that person, or you know what I mean? I just feel like that's, and so I feel like in America, when you look at the bigger like voting process, so many people voted based on their like emotional hit and very little information, honestly, like probably couldn't
Yes,
tell you
I
what the
like that
policies were,
name or I
or
like that
like,
face.
didn't read Project 2025. There's like, I don't know, you just feels good, like feels like he's
Yeah.
saying the right thing or she's saying the right thing. And so when it comes right down to it, we're just emotional creatures, and
Yes.
so it's like the journalists who are trying to give us unbiased information are just creating a negative emotion in us over and over and over. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
they're not understanding how the human body actually, I mean, it'd be horrifying to them, I think, to know that they're writing all this information and just being like, everyone's just going to shut down, not believe you, not trust you, or just like go into grief and like not read the news for like 6 months. You know what I mean? Like no
Right.
journalist wants that as the outcome of what they're writing about. Like that's a bad outcome. Like they want to serve. Like that's the idea that the media is trying. Good journalists are trying to serve the public, like their job. And if they thought that like what they were doing was just shutting people down and turning people off from even getting any information and then just putting shit, they're going to go to the exact opposite space, which is like, I'm just going to go with my heart. I'm going to go with my gut, which is not a very,
Yes.
like rational place. It's not full of information. That's just, so I think that is It's almost
Well,
like that they're pushing us to the exact opposite of what they're trying to do. Like we get overwhelmed and shut down, and then we're just like, oh fuck it. Either I'm not going to care, I'm not going to vote at all, which many people don't, because they're just like,
yes, yes.
I don't even care. It's too overwhelming. I know it's all a bunch of bullshit. Who cares? Like that's a huge segment of the population. Or you've got emotional camps,
Yes.
and I think there's very few people in the middle of that like anymore. And so to get to that, back to that idea of mediation where you bring people together to solve a problem, like, whoa, that's a long road to get to. But I think that's the road we need to
There,
looking at.
I did all that, and this is years ago now, but that community development work with the Ford Family Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I may have brought this up before, but there was this conference of communities and, 200 people from all over the state. And they had, various trainings about communication and blah, 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 blah. But there was this guy who had been a state senator for Nebraska, I think, for years. And he was all retired, but he was there to talk to us about negotiation, and specifically about, we may have brought this up before, like position-based negotiating versus it's not need-based, interest-based negotiation,
Mm-hmm.
and how important it is to like not negotiate, do not play with a position-based negotiator, because they are only there to sway you or get their own way. They have no interest in you.
Right.
And so they are not, then there is no negotiating. So
Right.
do not negotiate with them, because there literally is no negotiating. And so if you have two position-based people working together, or work trying to like come up with a deal, there's a
Mm-hmm.
winner and there's a loser. It's a
Right.
zero-sum game.
Right.
And I feel like politics in the United States is totally put into that realm of, it's a zero-sum game. And so then it's like I mean, we could go on forever about how infuriating. But
Mm-hmm.
the flip side of it is when people work together, which happens a lot in small communities, like if
Mm-hmm.
you can get to the place of interest-based negotiating, then the solution comes up that meets everybody's needs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, but the like the danger are the self-serving, the charming self-serving,
Mm-hmm.
who can give the appearance of playing the game, but then once they're in the right position, then they just go back to
Yeah.
self-serving.
Right. Yeah.
So,
And I think it's really key again to just take this back to our personal level and be like, if we're modeled what we're being modeled in the world about how to tell a story, how to negotiate, how to, yeah, I mean, like how to get information or give information is in this, is in the model we just discussed for the last hour, is like we are left with kind of personal skills that mimic that. Like you know, we're not left with like if we were reading stories all the time that were like, okay, here's the problem and let's get curious about how they solved it, it would help our brains do that at an emotional and personal level. Like if the media was
yes,
telling stories like that, we would start mimicking that in our thought pattern. Like, okay, cool,
yes,
there's a problem, but like, how do we figure this out? Where's the solution? Like, how do we work together? It pushes us, what you said, into that away from position based into like, let's negotiate for real. Let's
yes,
actually try to figure this out. And so I do think the storytelling of the media is way overdue for a huge upgrade and shift to understand literally how our nervous systems actually work. Because it's the way it's designed now. It's not. I mean, it's driving a very negative result. We can see that.
so the cool thing is that this is this crazy time in history where like we're going to send this out, and dozens of people, hundreds of people, like
Yeah.
how many people are going to hear this conversation?
Right.
That it was not possible to have, even like, I mean, think about, I have some ideas. I'm gonna, what would it have taken 45 years ago to get dozens of your neighbors to listen to
Totally.
this conversation.
You
It
and
just
I
wasn't
talk for
there.
an hour.
Yeah, no way, So, but and so it's like the possibility is we
Yes.
can use our voice and have
And also we are
we
the
can
media
change.
now.
What's that?
We are the media now. Like
Yes,
that's the thing.
yes.
It's not, you don't have to work for the New York Times or the Washington
The
Post. Like
legacy media is
we are
is
creating
collapsing.
tons of media,
Yeah.
and we are not burdened by this idea of like we have to be we can't talk about solutions because that's making us impartial. Like I will freely talk about solutions. That's actually why I'm doing the whole podcast, to try to look at the problem and think about how we can make it better. That's the point of this whole podcast. So
Yes.
like I think we're embodying the journalism we want to see in the world, but I also think it was cool just to spend an hour talking to you about like, oh, like if you really step back, you can see the paradigm we're the fringe here. Like
Yes.
we would be seen as being like super biased and like, this isn't real journalism. We're not doing, this isn't like clean media or whatever. But I do think that it's actually more helpful. And let's go with what works. Let's go with what helps people. Let's, focus
Have you read the
on information and solutions side by side. If we're going to diagnose a problem, we got to be the doctors that give some ideas of like what we could do about it.
Have you read the book
Otherwise,
Switch?
no.
It might be up there. It's a great book. The Heath brothers. I'm like,
I
there's a
love that you,
bookshelf right
I love
next
on
to
a
me.
podcast, you're like, it might be.
It might be right up there. There's a bookshelf right there. Um, the Heath brothers. It's all about how we change our minds.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's super interesting book. Like
Cool.
I feel like there's a whole chapter on appreciative inquiry. And if you
Mhm.
live in the state of Oregon, because I just was thinking about the Ford family, I do believe that it is um available for free from the Ford family.
Oh, okay, cool.
They have a list of books that if you live in the state of Oregon or in Siskiyou County, California, you can request. I'll find the link and send it to you.
Yeah, send me a link. I'll put it in the show
Oh,
notes.
I can't remember what it's called. And sometimes you can get them as recorded books or as physical books. They'll just send
Yeah.
it to you.
And then there's a lot of books you can just listen to from the library for free.
There's also books you can listen to from the
Yeah.
library, but it's called Switch.
Switch. Okay, cool.
I
Yeah, I'll
think
put
you'd
that on.
like it. I want to re-listen to it
And
now.
I will link, for those who want, I will link the podcast that I was talking about listening to
Yes.
so you guys can listen to the entire episode, because I was just giving some highlights. I highly recommend this guy, like listening to him give his whole talk about the media. It's really, there's a lot we didn't go into. We didn't have
Awesome.
but yeah, I'll put that in there too. So now we're back on our media game. We are podcasting again, and I'll
Yes.
talk to you
Yeah.
next week.
Yeah. My birthday next week.
Happy Gemini
I
season,
know.
everybody. We love our
Woohoo.
Geminis. The very active in the media. Obviously, they love the talk and love telling stories.
Oh my God.
And yes, happy birthday, Iris, coming up. And
Yeah. I gotta go to the train station.
I know
So
you got to get out of here. So
I gotta get out of here. I love
thanks,
you. All
everybody. Love you. And we'll talk next week.
right. Bye-bye.
Okay, we're good.
All right. See